Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all had a fine lunch, and I have the first session after lunch today. So my name's Chris Field, and I thought I'd introduce myself to you, perhaps more visually than normal. That was the first computer I ever used. It's an ICL 1904S. It had 16 bytes of main memory, and it had a 20 gig exchangeable magnetic disk store that was the size of this stage. After I did university, I decided my obvious career was to go into finance, so I became an accountant. And of course, this is the typical dress for an accountant within London. And when I arrived there, this was my first computer. And it's a contometer machine. If you go to the British Science Museum, it's in the corner there. I actually learnt to use it. I actually use a slightly more electronic one most of the time, but I work for Plessey in the defence contracting, military, discrete manufacture area. And of course, as an accountant, you have to have audit trails. There's our audit trail up there. It was the old-fashioned till roll adder that we added up and consolidated the accounts with. That was the first electronic computer I used. You might recognise the Apple IIe. This was a fantastic one. It had the 128-column card on board. It had twin 160K floppy drives on board. So a really, really powerful machine on which we did our project accounting. Lastly, I moved into the paint and surface coatings industry, where we were acquired by Takura Veritat, a Finnish company. And I then, in terms of my accounting career, because as an accountant, I ended up in the Sedgwick Group, which at that time was the third largest insurance broker in the world. This was my day job. Guess what? Spreadsheets and all this sort of thing. And within Sedgwick, we approached ComShare, who were one of the earlier decision support companies. And my day job became I actually implemented the ComShare solution to cover budgeting, group consolidation, financial planning, etc. Latterly, they were acquired by Infor, and in fact, I got headhunted from ComShare into the IT industry at that point. And then I, of course, saw the light, and now I'm with Board. So I'm talking to you today about the great benefits of Board. And I can tell you from some of my early jobs, God, I wish I had Board in those days. So, what is the current business issue? And I suppose it is where we are here. Finance was an early adopter of technology. Those machines I showed you in those pictures, in their day, they were leading edge. They were really very much ahead of the game. Most organisations have now put in ERPs, certainly Y2K dealt with that. And we end up with the difficulties of data fragmentation. We now find we've got multiple cloud systems, we have in-house systems, we have CRM systems, trying to join them together. And it is a big challenge to automate and integrate. Net result of that often is the lack of business insight. And I suppose if you look at this study, this is actually by one of our silver partners, PwC Finance here, key business issues we face, lack of accurate data, secure and stable environment not being present there. And if you look at it from another side, 77% of CFOs believe that technology advances are a top global trend and will transform their operations. I think the word will is the one that worries me the most there. 95 days, the average day to consolidate or complete a budget. These I'd flick through quite quickly. 71% of British companies always use spreadsheets for key decision making. 38 billion worth of investments made by the private sector as a result of spreadsheet calculations. And 88% the number of spreadsheets that contain significant errors. KPMG World Class Finance also did a similar study where they found a slightly higher number than that. But more importantly, in many of those cases, the user was unaware of it. So what's the solution to that problem? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Business intelligence, data warehouse, multidimensional OLAP slice and dice databases, scorecards, dashboards, management reports. It's going to be the saviour of our business. Or is it? What's the definition of a data warehouse? Well, lots of good things. One version of the truth. A validated collection of data, collected from key operational systems. But the last point is the crucial one. It's a historic record. In many ways, business intelligence is like getting in your car, blacking out the front windscreen, and driving to your destination using just the rearview mirror. Would you do that? I'm damned if I would. So, let's look at the management reporting challenge. I don't know how many of you are finance in here, but those of you who are financial people, put your hand up. How many of you have produced that report? And I'm going to start by putting my hand up. Yeah, there's a few of us, isn't there? What do you think of that report? Is it any good? Does it actually deliver any value to the business? Well, if you look at it, what does it tell us? Well, sales year to date are 5,000 down. Costs, our gross margin is 1.2 million up. And by the way, I wrote more than a few commentaries that said exactly that. They're actually almost completely free of any value. You could, of course, put a future spin on that. I could stick a forecast column on the end, so then it's forward-looking. It isn't. It's great for telling us what happened, but the key issue of this report, there's no relation to the actions that drove them. There's little or no information about the future. And it very much is an accounting-based view of the world. That's not to say it's good or bad. We have to produce accounts. We have a legal duty to file statutory accounts. All the information is financial in those reports. So let's look at the role of analytic solutions on top of that. What do they allow us to do? Again, I'm going to make you work. Two companies here, Company A, Company B. If you have a look at the numbers. Which company was more successful? And what I'd like you to do is put your hand up if you think it's Company A. Can't see any hands at the moment. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 5, that's good. Company B. Yeah, I've got 1 for Company B. No one's put their hand up, do they? Why wasn't it Company A? It's more successful in every single way. It's got higher shareholder return. It's got better return on equity. It's got better cash flow. It has better sales per employee. Of course it's more successful. But of course the reason that you're not going to answer that question for me is very simple. It's because you think it's a trick question, and you probably could have been right. How do we know Company A was successful? And what tells us more about it? Well, this slide does. It tells us that in terms of Company A, it was customer satisfaction. They have a 90% customer satisfaction versus 75. They have a lower defect rate. They have more on-time delivery. Where do you want to order your goods from? Do you want it from one that's going to send it up 3 weeks late, or do you want one that's going to get there to you when they promised it? They have a lower employee turnover and lower product returns. Of course it's more successful, but it is the non-financial data here that's actually telling us why the financial numbers make sense. So, business intelligence told us all that, and so did analytics. But what's missing from that equation? What do you think Company B should do if it's going to grow its business? Now, I'm not going to ask you the questions here. I'm going to give this one away. This is the sort of thing they should be doing. They should be looking at establishing a plan, improving quality, getting better customer service, all of those kinds of value-added tasks. So at that point, we really come into the area of integrated business planning. What we're now starting to think about is looking at what counts. How is your business actually valued? Now, if you're an investor and you've got a lot of money, you will no doubt do your research, particularly those who are financially inclined will look at their annual accounts, will look at their statements of direction, will look at their strategy, and we will then make an informed decision over where to invest our money. Trouble is, execution of strategy is one of the most important things in that equation. The reason for it is that if you invest in a company, you will have an investor profile. You may, for instance, be investing for capital growth because you have a high marginal tax rate. You may be investing for dividend income because that's your main source of income. You may be investing because you want a company that's a high-tech company and delivers values. You may be concerned about the environment and look at a green company. And what the studies have shown is that organisations that overperform in a particular area, but actually didn't say they were going to do it, actually get punished by the shareholders because they didn't want that kind of investment. If I invested in a company that was going to deliver capital growth and it delivers a massive income growth, that's not good for me because now I've suddenly got a tax liability I didn't expect. And the second most important thing is quality of strategy. Amongst those goals there's no link of high profitability, there's no indication that they want growth, etc. It is very much to deliver against the strategy the organisation promised. And I think this slide actually said it all to me. If you look at it, based upon surveys here, we're finding that something like 50 to 60% of the strategic plan is all that is delivered at best. And I suppose the graphic there, maybe we should have done what we planned to do, is very telling in that process. So that really brings us into the topic of integrated business planning and thinking about what integrated business planning really means. So integrated business planning is actually a series of processes. It starts typically with the derivation of strategy. Now, I suppose one of the things that I commonly see, and one of the nice things for you guys, you have board, and that's a very big competitive advantage for you. But when people come to us and say, well, I've got a problem, the first problem they usually say is, well, do you know, we've asked you in today because we have a budgeting problem and we want a budgeting system. Or we come in and they say, well, no, it's not a budgeting problem. We have a financial consolidation problem. We can't get our accounts out in time. Or we have a BI problem. We have problems in our warehouse, logistics problems. We don't know how long it takes to ship goods. We need scorecards and dashboards to track it. Probably the most telling of those problems is the person that says to me, well, I want a budgeting and planning system. I would say to you, you passionately do not want a budget and planning system. That is not the first thing you should have on your shopping list. The first thing you should have on your shopping list is a strategic planning system. Why? If you think about it, if you go out and get on a train, where does the train go? What would you feel like if you got on that train at Milano and you suddenly found that you ended up, I don't know, on the southern coast of Italy rather than at the airport or whatever? The nice thing about trains is trains go down lines and they tend to go where you planned them. The issue with strategy is if I say to you as a management team, I now want you to prepare your budgets and plans. What do you think your best interests are served by? Would you put an aggressive high sales number in? Would you squeeze the last coin out of expenses to reduce expenses to a minimum? Well, I certainly wouldn't, given the choice. I would actually want a nice revenue target that I can be sure of delivering so I can earn my bonus and I'll get a pat on the back to say how well I've done. I'd actually quite like the expenses budget to be a little bit generous, so just in case I overspend on something, I'm not going to get challenged by that. But really what I should be doing is saying, how does my job add value to the organisation? And the way we do that is by strategy. So the leaders of the organisation explain what are the objectives of the organisation, what are we trying to achieve, and we then need to link that strategy to our job roles. Once we've got that strategic plan in place, then we're absolutely right. What you said to me, you wanted a budgeting or planning system, is exactly what we're doing next. So the next stage of that process is the financialisation of that strategic plan. Now, the interesting thing here also is, what is a strategic plan versus a budget? Now, in terms of strategic planning, if you look at people like Norton and Kaplan's and some of the analysts here, and you talk to them about that plan, they will say there's a couple of characteristics of it. Now, I'm not going to advocate the benefits of the balanced scorecard. It is a methodology as such which is variable. It's often because it's implemented poorly rather than the system itself being bad. But what they talk about is having probably 50 measures at maximum in terms of driving the business. And I think there were a couple of speakers that talked the other day about different areas and actually having too many metrics or deciding exactly. I think ZF spoke and talked about determining exactly which metrics need to be monitored and having a justification process in place where you determine which measures you need in which parts of the business. Once you've done that, you can move to the next stage, which is the business plan. And here we also have to be careful. One of the things I commonly see, we talk to people, so, okay, well, your budgeting process, so talk about your budgeting process to me. Well, we actually budget for 2,000 chart of account lines. 2,000. Can you actually cope with that? And that 2,000, if you took a subset, now for instance, I came from an insurance broking background, and with insurance, there are three key costs. Probably the biggest cost is staff costs because it's a people-driven business. The second business cost is IT, and the third business cost is travel and entertainment. In terms of your budgeting and planning process, would you break down your travel expenses into rail, air, hotel, bicycle mileage, shoe leather, trains, whatever it might happen to be? Well, the answer is you shouldn't, because that's going to a very, very low level of detail. There are concepts of zero-based budgeting, and some of those go even further down. I'm actually working with a company the other day who suggested that we should budget by trip and plan for each trip which class hotel we're going to stay in, which chain of hotel, which car rental company we're going to. I would say to you this is a very extensive level of detail, which you probably don't want. But the planning process should follow from that strategic plan. The second stage then is we move into a monitoring stage, because we now have that plan in place. And here we'll be using the typical analytics, the drill down, and some of the features you've seen shown earlier on. I think Clear Channel was showing some of the abilities to drill down into that. And then finally, we move into the area of predictive analytics. And I think KPMG, when Brad was talking yesterday, talked about adding some of the forecasting concept into that. And we then form this closed-loop process, which is integrated business planning. So I suppose, what are the characteristics of an integrated business plan? Well, the first thing is it should be driver-based. We really don't want people having to put in detail at chart of accounts level. It should be action-orientated, because at the end of the day, the whole value of planning is to help us decide what we can do, can we afford it, will it deliver value for the business? We then move into the third area on the right-hand side, which is the scenario-based planning. So there's a concept called plan to fail. It sounds very negative, but plan to fail is something that's quite important. Do you really want to rerun all your planning process because a particular event occurred? We should try and foresee things that are likely to occur. And this, I think, actually, probably the best example recently of this is the UK government. When the UK government put a referendum out and asked us whether we wanted to remain in Europe or not, they thought we were all going to vote to stay in. I voted to stay in, but 51% of the country decided we wouldn't. And they actually had no contingency plan in place if that happened, and that's now being revised. And finally, it's the last part, which is looking at the aspects of rolling planning within that. And I suppose the last slide, before I just show you a little bit of it here, is just looking at the fundamentals of IBP. So it's looking at the concept of stretch goals, challenges. How do we stretch our management team to achieve more? It's talking about simplicity. Now, radical simplicity sounds strange. This is what I'm saying to you. You don't budget for 12,000 accounts. You certainly don't plan for 12,000 accounts. You probably look at planning for, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred accounts at the most. But when you do your strategic plan at the top level, probably 50 measures is all we should be looking at. And the advantage of simplicity is often seen more frequently in larger groups. So the larger your group, the more you need control and standardization. So we have a common business language. We actually understand what is the definition of revenue. I worked with a major chemical company, and within their business, we actually found 200 different definitions of revenue. So simplifying things is important. And then the conversation earlier this morning when KPMG were talking, they talked about the fact that process is part of that, retooling the culture, getting people to work in a different way. So, what does it look like? Now, if Pietro or any of the development team in the audience, I do apologise. I've got the older client version of this at the moment. I haven't actually upgraded to the new one yet. I will have done shortly. But this is possibly what it looks like. And I thought I wanted to show you this really, just to give you some sort of concept. And if you talk about that strategy, this is the sort of level of detail we go into. So the first thing we look at is driver-based planning. And what you're now seeing in this particular model, and we're working with a variety of people. With KPMG currently we're developing an IBP model specifically for banking, so it would incorporate within them the best practices for banking. And we're doing similar things with other parts and other partners there. What this allows me to do as Chief Executive Officer is take a very, very different view of the world. I don't expect many of you will have seen the P&L account here presented as a Gantt chart. So here you see now I've got my revenue, I've got my expenses, I've got my EBIT coming out to the bottom. And down below, not only am I calculating the income statement, I'm calculating the balance sheet, because that obviously is very important. Here we're looking at things like weighted average cost of capital. This particular example is utilising the economic value add method of calculating that. And this typically allows the CFO to come in, and in terms of his business, he can choose different business units. So I've chosen Manchester here, probably quite unfortunately considering the news in the paper today, but I'll stick with that one. I have the ability to simulate, so I'm seeing 3 different simulations. You can see 4, 5, 6, whatever that might be. And I'm looking at a 5-year time horizon. But I can now ask board different questions. So I could say, well, let's look at the effect of increasing market share to 25%, for instance. And I don't know, in order to fund that, I'm going to have maybe 5% growth in FTEs or full-time employees. But also in conjunction with that, to pay for it, I'm going to need to increase my debt finance to 30%. What does that look like? If I press my save button here, there it is. You can see immediately I've improved my profit after tax, I've improved my economic value add, and I've improved my capital costs. So as a Chief Operating Officer, I can very, very simply simulate. And I think these are some of the concepts, again, KPMG were talking about this morning when they had those management meetings out there and they were looking at modelling that in real time. Or I could take a rather different perspective on it. I could take the pure strategic approach. So in this particular case, I'm looking at strategies. These are my business strategies. So you'll see a couple of things here. Strategy is as much about text as it is about numbers. It's about saying why you are doing things, what the objectives of doing things, and how you're going to achieve it. So here you can see there's my strategy. Below that I've given a description. What's the chance of it happening? Oh God, that one needs to change, doesn't it? So with our local election here, it's never going to happen in March 2018. It will probably be at least probably September. So I can just update the commentary there. And of course my spelling is, as many of you will know in the past, you've seen me, is dreadful. So there's my spelling. And down here, I've got the detail of that plan. It could be a Word document, an Excel document. Once I've done that, the next stage of that is to look at the activities that drive that strategy. And so here, for instance, I have a number of activities. So what I'm going to do is, let's say, add a new activity. And seeing as we're in Baverno today, I'm going to open a site in Bavino because it's a very nice place to be. And of course, with an activity, it's never going to work unless you have ownership. So I'm going to assign that to a particular person. I'm going to assign it to myself. And in terms of the strategic goals it's linked to, this is part of my Brexit strategy. I'd very much rather live in Baverno than I would live in the centre of London. So I'm sure those Italians amongst you will understand that. And having done that, of course, I can put some descriptive information. I need to say who's going to execute against that. So I'm going to assign responsibility. I'm going to make that the responsibility of the production department here. So you now see I've done that. And having done all that lot, I need to understand the business impact on my plan. And here what I'm going to do, I'm choosing the same site. I'll choose a particular case, maybe the original case here. And again, I can put some sort of actions against it, the chances. I can have the concept of milestones. So in that planning process, particularly for a major project like a new site or a new production line, etc., there will be different activities within it. So I can break it down. Board has that time intelligence that allows you to do it. And down the bottom, I can now say, well, what's the revenue impact? Again here, I'm budgeting at a very high level. I've actually only got half a dozen chart of account items here to drive that whole process. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to generate, let's say, 1 million per annum in revenue. My cost of goods sold will be 500k. I'm just typing it in very quickly because I don't want to waste time. And loan financing on that will be 20%. And I'm going to mess this up slightly deliberately. I'm going to put in 1 million spend on buildings there. And once I've done that, I can simply press save here, and we can now immediately see what's the impact. Well, in fact, it's actually improved my EBIT by 1.9 million and my EVA by 1.3 million. Looks like that project's a goer. How would you as the chief executive like to see that if you were considering what you're going to do in the future? This is a great view, isn't it? I wonder which of those activities drove that increase in profit. So this is your upright P&L. It doesn't show you information terribly well. Of course, I've got my balance sheet here, my assets, liabilities, all the normal sorts of things you see. Why don't you take a different view of it? So if I then look at maybe an activity based here. So what you can see on the left-hand side, there's my as is. Let's open that office in Amsterdam, see what effect that has on the business. That was good. And I'm looking at EVA at the moment. I think I'd rather look at EBIT. Let's open that office in Baverno. Yeah, that's got a nice one. Let's open a factory in Poland. Oh dear, that one doesn't look so good. Let's not open the office in Poland. Let's instead try opening a different office over here. So that adds value. But what this allows you to do as a manager is to see the impact of every single activity that you're going to undertake and then make an informed decision upon what you want to do going forward. And the nice bit, which I'm not going to show you on this, because I did promise to cut my time down a bit because we're running a little bit late here, is to say we can then rejoin that whole process back to that of the business strategy, because within Board, you're doing it in one place. So I've shown you the creation of the strategic plan here. What I can then do is go straight into the creation of the budget. I've got the strategic budget, the targets and things in place. So when you construct that budget, you now know what it is you're trying to achieve. And of course, because I've got the strategic plan, because I've got the budget, because I can then interface the actuals into it, within that one single system, you have the whole structure. So you then get that one view of the business, which is where the real power of integrated business planning comes in. I've got a finally here. Those two firms, Company A, Company B, well, they weren't actually Company A and Company B at all. In fact, the source of this information, I actually had the honour of presenting with Professor Wall at a partner conference with Cadenza, one of our partners here, and he was the author of the particular report this came from, which was looking at the quest for balance in finance. The firms on the left there, the firms with performance management, that was Company A. So they actually invested in performance management. The ones on the right-hand side were the ones that didn't. And surprisingly enough, of course, the ones on the left perform better than the ones on the right. So there's, if you like, is your value proposition for why you should be looking at this kind of system. I have finished early, so hopefully Mr. Berlusconi is in and around the room. But that does leave me time to take some questions if there are any questions in the room. In which case, thank you all very much. One at the back.
Hi, compliments for your presentation. It has been very interesting for me because you merged two sides of the medal, the project management and the financial effects of the strategy execution. The question is about the platform. How many details from a project management point of view is possible to manage? I do an example. Gantt reports, WBS, work breakdown structures, and other typical features of a project management tool. Thank you.
Yes, and that is very right. Now here I'm looking at the overall planning side. This is not to say that higher level of detail is irrelevant, but what I'm looking at is the front end. So in terms of those projects here, we are planning at quite a high level. So we're looking initially at the strategic plan. So for those, we keep the detail to a minimum. Once you get down to the detailed activity of the project, that actually falls back into the other part of Board. So I guess what I didn't do when I showed you that particular demo here, if I go back to the front screen, what you will see on the bottom side here, I've now got the operational planning. So if I go into perhaps, I don't know, maybe that one on the left-hand side here and drill down, you're now into the detail. So you will need that detail because at the end of the day, I've got the top-level plan. I'm going to, in terms of that project, I would look at maybe the high-level detail. What's the key investments? What's the timescale? What's the main milestones? But then when I get into the operational side, I'll then drill down to that deeper level. And for instance, we've done work with people like GVA Grimley. So we're holding, for instance, for the buildings, what's the lease expiry date? What's the next lease event? When's the refurbishment due? That is still very much there, but that's going to be driven by the top level information because in terms of your searching ability, the first thing you're going to do is to say, well, have I delivered against strategy? And that's the question often asked by the CEO or the CFO. So with this solution, we're able to say, well, here's the budget, here's the actuals, here's the strategy. No, we didn't deliver against strategy. And at that stage, we then drilled down into the level of detail you're talking about to say, well, okay, why didn't we achieve it? Well, actually, these are the 3 projects. We did undertake those 3 projects. Oh, no, we didn't. There was a 4th project we hadn't planned to undertake. Let's drill into the 4th one. That project went wrong. So they still have the dual role for that. Thank you. In which case, if Michele's around, I'll say thank you very much for your attention today. If you'd like to talk any more about that, I shall be on the booths, and also my colleague Sebastian over there, who actually was the author of this model originally, can talk more about that too. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.